muffled thud, scattering credit cards across the greasy tiles of Harper's Café. Amara's hand froze mid-wipe, her cleaning rag dripping soapy water onto her worn sneakers. She glanced toward the exit where the last customer had just disappeared into the November rain, his black coat vanishing like smoke into the neon-lit street. Her heart hammered as she crouched down, fingers trembling as they touched the expensive leather. Inside, crisp $100 bills fanned out like accusations, 40 of them. $4,000. More money than she'd seen in 6 months of scrubbing tables and surviving on instant noodles. "Girl, is that what I think it is?" Chanello's voice cut through the kitchen doorway, sharp with excitement. Her roommate emerged, eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Amara, tell me you're not about to do something stupid." Amara's throat tightened. The cafe's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Her shift didn't end for another hour, but already her feet ached, her back screamed, and her bank account sat at negative $47. The tuition payment was due in 3 days. 3 days before they'd drop her from the nursing program she'd fought so hard to enter. "I have to return it," she whispered, but her hands wouldn't let go. "Return it?" Chanello laughed, the sound brittle and desperate. "To who? Some rich man who won't even notice it's gone? Amara, wake up. This is survival." But Amara was already pulling out her phone, fingers finding the business card tucked between the bills. Black. Expensive. Embossed with Korean characters she couldn't read, and a phone number in silver lettering. Her conscience burned hotter than her exhaustion. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, deep and measured, with an accent that wrapped around English words like silk. "Who is this? My name is Amara Bassi. You left your wallet at Harper's Café. I wanted to. She paused, suddenly aware of how her voice shook, how presumptuous this call seemed. "I wanted to return it to you." Silence stretched across the line, so complete she wondered if he'd hung up. Then, how much was inside? The question hit her like a slap. "I didn't count it. That's not why I called." "Everyone counts." His tone was neither cruel nor kind, just factual, as if stating the color of the sky. "Tell me, how much?" $4,000. The words tasted like metal. "And some cards. Everything's still here." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, something had shifted in his voice, a crack in that perfect composure. "Keep the wallet safe. My driver will arrive in 30 minutes. Don't leave the cafe." "Wait, The line went dead. Chanello was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. "You actually called him? Amara, what if he's dangerous? What if he thinks you stole it? Then returning it proves I didn't." But doubt crept in anyway, cold fingers down her spine. She tucked the wallet into her apron pocket, feeling its weight like a stone. The next 30 minutes crawled by. Amara wiped down tables that were already clean, reorganized menus that didn't need organizing, all while watching the rain-streaked windows for any sign of a car. Chanello hovered nearby, muttering warnings that Amara barely heard over the roar of her own pulse. When the black Mercedes pulled up, sleek and impossibly out of place in this neighborhood, Amara's stomach dropped. The driver emerged, all sharp suit and sharper eyes, scanning the cafe's interior before his gaze locked onto her. "Miss Bassi?" His voice carried an authority that made her straighten instinctively. "Yes." She approached slowly, pulling the wallet from her pocket. "Everything's here. I didn't take anything." He accepted it without expression, checking the contents with practiced efficiency. Then he reached into his jacket, and for one terrible moment, Amara's mind conjured images from every crime drama she'd ever seen. But he only pulled out an envelope, crisp and white. "Mr. Park asked me to give you this." He pressed it into her hands before she could protest. "He also said to tell you." The driver paused, something almost like respect flickering in his eyes. "He said to speak of this to no one, not for his sake, for yours." Before Amara could ask what that meant, he was gone, the Mercedes disappearing into the rain as if it had never existed. Her fingers shook as she opened the envelope. Inside, $50 bills lay stacked and perfect. $5,000. More than the wallet had contained. More than she'd make in 3 months of burning herself out at this cafe. And tucked between the bills, a note in precise handwriting, "For your honesty. Speak of this to no one." The money should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like a secret, heavy and dangerous, something that would change her in ways she couldn't yet name. Amara stood there in the empty cafe, rain drumming against the windows, holding 5,000 reasons to be grateful and one terrible certainty that nothing would ever be quite the same. That night, she lay awake in the apartment she shared with Chinello, staring at the water-stained ceiling and thinking about that voice on the phone. Deep, controlled, sad somehow beneath all that carefully maintained distance. She thought about the warning. Speak of this to no one, not for his sake, for yours. What kind of man gave away $5,000 to a stranger? What kind of life required such secrecy? The questions followed her into restless sleep, where she dreamed of black business cards and voices like silk and rain that never stopped falling. 3 weeks passed. Amara paid her tuition, bought groceries that weren't ramen, and tried to forget about the mysterious man and his cryptic generosity. She succeeded most hours of most days, buried under the crushing weight of nursing school, anatomy exams, clinical rotations, study groups that lasted until 3 a.m. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between classes, she'd find herself wondering, imagining scenarios where she'd see him again, thank him properly, understand the sadness she'd heard beneath his words. She never expected it to actually happen. The university library was her sanctuary, a place where the chaos of her life settled into something manageable. Amara had claimed her usual corner on the 3rd floor, surrounded by medical textbooks and highlighters in every color, when she felt it. That prickling awareness of being watched. She looked up. He stood 20 feet away, partially hidden by a bookshelf, and for a moment their eyes met across the space. Recognition hit her like electricity. Even without the expensive coat, even in just dark jeans and a simple black sweater, he carried himself with that same careful control she remembered from his voice. It had to be him. He was beautiful in a way that made her forget to breathe. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations, black hair falling slightly across his forehead, as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was the sadness in his expression that caught her, that same melancholy she'd heard over the phone, now written across his face like a language she was just learning to read. He didn't approach, just watched her with an intensity that made her skin flush, made her suddenly aware of her rumpled hoodie and the pencil stuck through her messy bun. Then he moved, crossing the distance between them with quiet purpose. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd imagined, maybe 30 at most, and the shadows under his eyes suggested he slept as poorly as she did. Amara Bassi. He said her name like he'd been practicing it. I hoped I might find you here. Her mouth went dry. You were looking for me? I wanted to thank you. Properly. He gestured to the empty chair across from her. May I? She nodded, incapable of actual words. He sat with that same careful grace, folding his hands on the table between them. His fingers were long, elegant, marked with a small scar across one knuckle. You didn't have to give me that money. Amara finally managed. I was just returning what was yours, which is exactly why I gave it to you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Do you know how rare that is? Real honesty? Most people are honest. No. His voice was soft but certain. Most people are honest when it's convenient. You were honest when it cost you. The words settled between them, heavier than they should be. Amara felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built starting to crack. Was it a test? She asked. Leaving the wallet? Maybe. He looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. Maybe I was testing the world, seeing if there was still goodness in it. And he turned back to her, and this time his smile reached his eyes. I found what I was looking for. They talked until the library closed, until the fluorescent lights flickered their warnings and the security guard gave them pointed looks. They talked about everything and nothing. She learned he'd moved to the city 6 months ago for business his father controlled from Seoul. He learned she was first-generation Nigerian-American, the oldest of 4, carrying the weight of her family's dreams on shoulders that sometimes felt too small. When they finally walked out into the cold November night, Amara realized she'd laughed more in those 3 hours than she had in the last 3 months. And when Jinwoo asked if he could see her again, if maybe they could get coffee sometime, she said yes before her practical mind could interfere. She said yes and didn't let herself think about the warning. Speak of this to no one. for yours. Coffee became their ritual. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, between her clinical rotations and whatever mysterious business pulled Jinwoo through the city in tailored suits and tired eyes. They met at a small Ethiopian cafe near campus where the owner knew Amara by name and started preparing Jinwoo's Americano the moment he walked through the door. At first, they kept it light. Surface conversations about favorite books and terrible movies and the particular loneliness of living far from home. But slowly, inevitably, they peeled back layers. Amara told him about her mother's expectations, how every grade she earned carried the weight of sacrifices she couldn't repay, how she sometimes felt like she was living someone else's dream. "Do you want to be a nurse?" Jinwoo asked one afternoon, his fingers wrapped around his cup, steam rising between them. "I think so, most days." She stirred her coffee absently, but sometimes I wonder if I chose it because I wanted to heal people, or because my mother cleaned hospital floors for 20 years and I wanted to give her a different ending to that story. Maybe it's both. His eyes held hers. Maybe we can want something for ourselves and for the people we love. Maybe that's not weakness. Is that why you're here? In this city, running your father's business? His expression shuddered, that careful control sliding back into place. My father doesn't ask, he instructs, and I. He paused, choosing words like they cost him something. I do what's expected, what I was raised to do. But is it what you want? I stopped asking myself that question when I was 12. He smiled, but there was no happiness in it. It's easier that way. Amara reached across the table, her hand covering his before she could think better of it. His fingers were warm, and she felt him tense at the contact before slowly, deliberately, turning his hand over to lace their fingers together. Maybe you should start asking again, she whispered. They sat like that, hands intertwined on the scarred wooden table, until the cafe owner dimmed the lights and they had no choice but to step back into the cold. Winter settled over the city like a held breath. Jinwoo started teaching Amara Korean phrases, laughing at her pronunciation, writing characters on napkins that she'd tuck into her textbooks like secrets. She taught him pidgin, the Nigerian Creole she'd grown up speaking at home, and the first time he tried it, stumbling over "wettin' day happen," she laughed so hard she cried. He walked her home on the night she studied late, his presence solid and reassuring in the dark streets. They talked about everything except what they were becoming. Friends seemed inadequate. Something more felt impossible. One evening in December, as snow began to fall in lazy spirals, Jinwoo stopped her outside her apartment building. Amara, He looked up at the snow, then back at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes, something that made her heart stutter. You should know I'm not free. To be whoever I want, to choose. To choose what? Anything that matters. His voice was barely audible over the wind. My life, my future, the person I... He stopped, jaw tightening. My father has plans, expectations. For your business, for everything. He stepped closer and she could see snowflakes catching in his dark hair. There's a woman in Seoul, diplomat's daughter. Our families have had an understanding since I was 17. When the time is right, the words hit her like ice water. You're engaged. Not officially, but it's expected, inevitable. He looked at her with such desperate honesty that it hurt. I'm telling you this because I don't want to lie to you about anything, even when the truth is complicated, she finished. Yes. Should have walked away. Should have thanked him for his honesty and created distance before whatever this was could hurt them both. But standing there in the falling snow, watching this controlled, careful man break himself open for her, she found she couldn't move. What do you want, Jinwoo? She asked the question he'd stopped asking himself. If you could choose anything, what would you want? He looked at her for a long moment, snow gathering on his shoulders, his breath visible in the cold. Then he raised his hand, so slowly she could have stopped him, and brushed his thumb across her cheek, catching a snowflake there. I want impossible things, he whispered. I want mornings that don't start with duty. I want to laugh without permission. I want... His thumb traced along her jaw, and she stopped breathing. I want to know what it feels like to choose. Then choose. The words left her mouth before wisdom could intervene. Right now, this moment. Choose something just for yourself. Something broke in his eyes, years of control shattering like glass. He leaned in, giving her every chance to pull away, and when she didn't, when she tilted her face up to his, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost questioning, his lips soft against hers. But when she made a small sound and pressed closer, when her hands found the front of his coat and pulled, the kiss deepened into something desperate, something that tasted like longing and risk and all the words they'd been too afraid to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jinwoo rested his forehead against hers. "This is dangerous," he said. "I know. My family, if they knew." "I know. Amara." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the fear in his eyes was almost worse than the desire. "I can't promise you anything. I can't even promise you tomorrow." "Then give me tonight." She kissed him again, softer this time. "Give me right now." "That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Over the winter months, as snow turned to slush and slush to early spring rain, they fell deeper into something neither could name. They were careful, meeting in quiet corners of the city where no one would recognize Jinwoo's face, stolen hours between her classes and his obligations. They were careful, and it still wasn't careful enough. Amara learned the map of him, the scar on his knuckle from a childhood fight with his brother, the way he hummed when he was thinking off-key and unconscious, the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m, leaving him hollow-eyed and quiet. She learned that he loved thunderstorms and hated small talk and could cook exactly 3 dishes, all of them perfectly. He learned her too. How she twisted her hair when she was nervous, the specific laugh she reserved for when something genuinely delighted her, the way she talked to her mother on the phone, code switching between English and Yoruba and love. He memorized the exact shade of her eyes, brown with flecks of amber when the light hit right. They built a world in the spaces between their real lives. It was fragile and beautiful and doomed from the start, but neither of them could stop. In March, Amara found out about the scholarship. She came to their usual café with acceptance letters in hand, practically vibrating with excitement. "Full ride," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Someone paid the rest of my tuition and set up a scholarship fund in my name. Can you believe it? The administrator said they'd never seen anything like it." Jinwoo's face did something complicated. Pride and guilt and resignation all at once. "It was you." The words came out flat, not a question. "Amara, how long?" Her voice was rising despite her best efforts to control it. "How long have you been paying my bills behind my back?" "Since January. Just the tuition at first, but then I thought if you didn't have to work so many shifts, if you could focus on school." "You had no right." She stood, the acceptance letters crumpling in her fist. "No right to make me your charity case." "That's not what this is." He stood too, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "I wanted to help. I have resources I don't need, and you're killing yourself working 80 hours a week while maintaining a perfect GPA. I just wanted to ease the burden. By taking away my choice, by making me dependent on you." The hurt in her voice made nearby customers glance over. She lowered it to a harsh whisper. "You don't fix people with money, Jinwoo. That's not love. That's control." "I wasn't trying to control you." His composure was cracking, desperation bleeding through. "I was trying to show you what you mean to me. The only way I know how. Then learn a better way." She grabbed her bag, fighting tears. "Because I can't be with someone who thinks I'm something broken that needs fixing." She left him standing there and spent the next week ignoring his calls, deleting his texts unread, avoiding every place she thought he might find her. Shinelo watched her cry herself to sleep and said nothing, just held her and let her break. But on the 7th night, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows, someone knocked on her door. Amara opened it to find Jinwoo soaked through, his expensive suit ruined, his carefully styled hair plastered to his forehead. "I don't know how to do this," he said without preamble. "I don't know how to love someone without trying to protect them from every hard thing. I've spent my entire life being taught that care looks like control, that affection means eliminating obstacles." He was shaking from cold or emotion she couldn't tell. "But you're right. That's not love. That's just another cage. Jinwoo, I'm sorry." The words seemed torn from somewhere deep. "I'm sorry I didn't ask. I'm sorry I thought I knew what you needed better than you did. I'm sorry I've been so trained in power that I forgot about partnership." He took a shaky breath. I'm sorry, and I'm asking now. Can I try again? Can I learn how to do this right? Amara looked at him standing in her doorway, this man who'd been raised to command but was choosing to surrender, and felt her anger dissolve into something more complicated. Something like forgiveness braided with fear. Come inside, she said quietly. You're going to catch pneumonia. He stepped into her small apartment, water dripping onto the cheap linoleum, and she grabbed towels from the bathroom. When she came back, he was still standing there looking lost, and she remembered that he'd probably never been inside a place this small, this humble. Sit down before you collapse. She handed him a towel, watched him dry his face with movements that seemed uncertain. I'll make tea. They sat on her second-hand couch while the storm raged outside, drinking Earl Grey from mismatched mugs. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but weighted with things that needed saying. I want to show you something, Jinwoo finally said. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen before handing it to her. On the screen, a series of messages in Korean. She couldn't read them, but she recognized the tone in the characters, sharp and demanding. My father, Jinwoo explained. He knows about you. Someone in his organization has been following me, taking photos. He found out about the scholarship, about our meetings. He scrolled to show her grainy images of them together. The café, the library, outside her building. Evidence of their careful secret exposed. Amara's stomach dropped. What does he want? For me to end this. To come home to Seoul and fulfill my obligations. His jaw tightened. He's threatening to cut me off completely. The business, the family name, everything. And if I don't comply, he looked at her, eyes dark with fear. He'll make sure you suffer for it. There are things he can do, Amara. Immigration complications for your family, financial audits, academic investigations. He has reach. So this is it. The words came out hollow. We end it, and I go back to being just another nursing student you helped once. No. He set down his mug with enough force to slosh tea onto her coffee table. No, that's what he wants. That's what everyone wants, for us to be sensible and accept that people like us don't get to choose who we love. People like us? Different worlds, different expectations. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands. But I don't care about the world's opinion anymore. I care about you, about this, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we get to write our own story instead of living in the ones written for us. That's a beautiful thought, Amara said softly, but your father isn't wrong. We are from different worlds, and I've seen what happens when those worlds collide. My mother, she married outside her tribe. You know what that cost her? Her family didn't speak to her for 15 years. 15 years of holidays alone, of raising kids without grandparents, of being treated like she'd betrayed everything sacred. She pulled her hands free, wrapping them around her cooling tea. Love doesn't conquer all, Jinwoo. Sometimes love just makes everything hurt more. So what are you saying? His voice was carefully controlled again, that old armor sliding back into place. That we give up? That we let fear make our choices? I'm saying I'm tired. And she was, bone-deep exhausted from fighting, from wanting things she couldn't have, from building castles in the air and watching them crumble. I'm saying maybe your father is right. Maybe this is kinder in the long run. Jinwoo stood abruptly, pacing her small living room like a caged animal. You want kind? I'll tell you what's kind. Kind is fighting for the person who makes you want to be more than the sum of your obligations. Kind is believing that what we have is worth the cost. He stopped in front of her, and the raw emotion in his face made her heart ache. I love you, Amara. I'm in love with you. And I don't care if it's complicated or impossible or doomed. I need you to know that. The confession hung in the air between them, 3 words that changed everything and nothing. Amara felt tears spill over, hot tracks down her cheeks. I love you too, she whispered. That's why this is so hard. He knelt in front of her, hands on her knees, looking up at her with desperate hope. Then don't give up. Please, we'll figure it out. We'll be more careful. I'll handle my father. How? The question was harsh. How do you handle a man who has enough power to destroy my entire family? How do we keep doing this when every moment together puts the people I love at risk? I don't know. His honesty was brutal, but I know I can't go back to the life I had before you. I know that losing you feels like losing the only real thing I've ever had. She kissed him then, tasting salt from both their tears, and it was different from their other kisses. This one was grief and love and goodbye all tangled together. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. "One more night," she said. "Give me one more night before the world crashes in." They spent that night wrapped around each other on her narrow couch, talking in whispers about alternate universes where they'd met as different people, where they were just Jinwoo and Amara, unencumbered by family and expectation and the weight of different worlds. They fell asleep as dawn broke, and when Amara woke a few hours later, he was gone. On her coffee table, a small box and a note. Inside the box, a jade pendant on a delicate silver chain, carved in the shape of a bird in flight. The note, in his precise handwriting, "When it's safe, I'll return. Until then, fly. All my love, Jay." She wore the pendant every day, hidden under her scrubs, a secret pressed against her heart. The months that followed were the hardest of Amara's life. She threw herself into her studies with almost manic focus, acing her finals, volunteering for extra shifts at the hospital. Shinelo watched her with worried eyes but asked no questions when she came home, hollow-eyed and silent. She heard nothing from Jinwoo. No calls, no texts, no mysterious envelopes. It was like he'd been erased from the world, leaving only the jade pendant as proof he'd ever existed. Sometimes she convinced herself it had all been a dream, some elaborate fantasy she'd constructed to make her difficult life feel more meaningful. But the ache in her chest was too real for dreams. The way she still looked for him in crowds, still reached for her phone, expecting messages that never came. The way her mother asked over the phone, "Why do you sound so tired, Ne?" And she had no answer that didn't involve confessing everything. Summer arrived, then fall. Amara graduated top of her class, accepted a position as a nurse practitioner at Mercy General, and moved into a slightly less terrible apartment. She dated a few times, accepted by well-meaning friends who said things like, "You need to get back out there," without knowing there was nowhere to get back to. She let a perfectly nice doctor buy her dinner and walked home alone, the jade pendant cold against her skin. 2 years passed. 2 years of building a life that looked successful from the outside, a life her mother was proud of, a life that should have been enough. And it was. Mostly. Except for the moments it wasn't, the 3 a.m. wake-ups when she'd reach across the bed for someone who'd never been there, the split seconds when a tall figure in a black coat would make her heart stop before she realized it was a stranger. She learned to live with the ghost of him. Learned that love didn't always conquer. Sometimes it just haunted. But she kept the pendant. Kept it even when Shinelo suggested maybe it was time to let go. Even when her mother asked about the necklace she never took off. She kept it because some promises, even unspoken ones, deserved to be honored. It was a Thursday night in October when everything changed. Amara was finishing a double shift, exhausted down to her bones, when the emergency call came through. Motor vehicle accident, multiple injuries, one critical patient incoming with no identification. She was in the trauma bay when they brought him in, bloody and unconscious. And at first, she didn't recognize him. His face was swollen, one eye purpled shut, and whoever he'd been before the accident was obscured by damage and road rash. But then she saw his hands, those long, elegant fingers she'd memorized, now scraped and broken but unmistakably his, the small scar across one knuckle. Jinwoo, his name escaped her lips before professional training kicked in. Someone paged Dr. Reeves now. "We need x-rays, full trauma panel, and—" "You know this patient?" The attending physician looked at her sharply. She caught herself, years of nursing school overriding personal panic. "I need to recuse myself. Conflict of interest." But she couldn't make herself leave. Even as other nurses took over, as the trauma team swarmed around him with practiced efficiency, she stood frozen in the doorway, watching his chest rise and fall, watching the monitors track his heartbeat, watching him fight to stay in a world that had tried so hard to tear them apart. He had a concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and more bruises than she could count. But he was alive. The doctor said he was lucky, that another few inches and the impact would have been fatal. Amara sat in the break room and cried so hard she threw up. They admitted him under a false name for his own protection. Something about dangerous business dealings, his lawyer had mentioned. Amara shouldn't have gone to his room. shouldn't have risked her job and professional ethics. But at 2 in the morning, when her shift had ended hours ago and she still couldn't make herself go home, she found herself outside his door. He was awake, sitting up in the hospital bed, staring out the window at the city lights, and when he saw her, his entire face transformed. Amara, her name in his voice, rough from disuse and pain, nearly broke her. "You're here. You're real. You're in my hospital." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "What happened, Jinwoo? Where have you been?" "Seoul, then New York, then a dozen other cities, running my father's business and trying to forget you." He smiled, and it was such a sad, broken thing. It didn't work. She crossed the room, professional distance dissolving, and sat on the edge of his bed. Up close, she could see the extent of his injuries, the way pain had carved new lines in his face. "The accident," she prompted, "wasn't an accident." He said it flatly, without drama. "My father's associates. They wanted to send a message about some business decisions I've been making, decisions that don't align with family interests. They tried to kill you." The words felt absurd in the sterile hospital room, like dialogue from a bad movie. "They tried to remind me of my place." He looked at her, really looked, and she saw 2 years of loneliness reflected back. But it had the opposite effect. When the car hit, when I thought I was dying, all I could think was that I'd wasted 2 years. 2 years of pretending I could go back to who I was before I met you. 2 years of living half a life because I was too afraid to fight for a whole one. "Jinwoo?" I left. The words came fast now, like a dam breaking. After they pulled me from the wreck, after I spent a week in a Seoul hospital under my father's watchful eye, I left. I signed away my inheritance, broke the engagement, severed every tie to the Park family empire. He took her hand, his touch gentle despite the IV and bandages. "I have nothing now. No company, no family legacy, no guarantee of anything. Just a trust fund that's mine alone and a plane ticket back to the city where I left my heart." She was crying again, silent tears that blurred her vision. "You gave up everything." "No." He brushed his thumb across her knuckles, the gesture achingly familiar. "I gave up everything that didn't matter. The only thing I've ever wanted to keep is sitting right in front of me. I'm not worth all that." The words came out broken. "I'm just a girl who returned your wallet. You're the woman who showed me what integrity looks like, what courage looks like, what love looks like when it's not transactional or strategic or part of some larger plan." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "You're the person who made me want to be more than what I was raised to be. So yes, Amara, you're worth everything." She kissed him then, careful of his injuries, and it felt like coming home after years of being lost, like finding water after days in the desert, like every cliche she'd ever rolled her eyes at, suddenly true and real and perfect. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, breathing him in. Antiseptic and blood, and underneath it all, that scent she'd memorized years ago. "What now?" she whispered. "What do we do now?" "Now," he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, "now we do what we should have done from the start. We choose each other, every day, loudly, without apology or hiding. Your father has no power over me anymore. I'm not his son, not his heir. I'm just Jinwoo. And I'm asking if you'll give me a chance to be that, to build something real with you, even if it's built from nothing." Amara thought about her mother's 15-year exile from her family, about the cost of choosing love over expectation. But she also thought about the jade pendant she'd worn for 2 years, about the weight of living half a life, about the way she'd been slowly suffocating under the ghost of what they'd been. "I kept your pendant," she said softly, "every single day, even when I was so angry at you I could barely breathe, even when I tried to move on. I kept it because some part of me never stopped hoping you'd come back. I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry I left you wondering. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just being a coward." "No." She cupped his bruised face in her hands. "You were surviving. We both were, but maybe now we can do more than just survive." "Is that a yes?" Hope lit his eyes, making him look younger, less damaged by the years between them. "It's a let's try." She smiled through her tears. "It's a, this is terrifying and complicated and probably going to be harder than we imagine. It's a..." He kissed her again, cutting off her words, and she felt him smiling against her mouth. "I'll take it," he murmured. I'll take any version of this that includes you. They spent the rest of the night talking, filling in the gaps of 2 years. He told her about Seoul, about the business meetings where he'd felt like a puppet, about the night he'd stood on the Han River Bridge and almost called her. She told him about graduation, about her first patient death, about the doctor who'd asked her to dinner, and how she'd said yes, but spent the entire meal comparing him a ghost. When dawn broke through the hospital windows, painting them both in shades of gold and rose, Amara realized she was still in her scrubs, still technically at work, and absolutely didn't care. "I should go," she said without moving, "before someone catches me violating about 17 hospital policies. Stay." His hand tightened on hers. "Just a few more minutes. I've waited 2 years for this. I can be greedy for a few more minutes." So she stayed, watching the city wake up beyond the window, feeling his pulse steady beneath her fingers. She stayed because leaving felt impossible, because every moment with him felt like stolen time they had to hoard against future losses. But eventually, reality intruded. Her phone buzzed with messages from Chanello, wondering why she hadn't come home. The day shift nurses started their rounds, voices echoing in the hallway. The world demanded they participate, that they be more than just two people in a hospital room holding on to each other like life rafts. "I'll come back," Amara promised, standing reluctantly, "after I sleep and shower and convince my roommate I haven't lost my mind." "Have you?" Jinwoo asked, only half joking. "Lost your mind?" "Probably." She kissed his forehead gently, "but I think I'm okay with that." She made it to the door before he called her name. When she turned back, he was sitting up straighter, despite the obvious pain it cost him, and the expression on his face was so serious it made her heart skip. He told her, "about choosing you. Every day. I know I have to earn back your trust. I know it won't be easy, but I want you to know that I'm all in. No more running, no more letting fear or duty or anything else come between us." "I know." And she did. She could see it in every line of his body, hear it in every word. He was different from the man she'd met 2 years ago, the one who'd been so controlled, so careful. That man had been sanded down by loss until only the essential parts remained. "I'm all in too." The next few weeks were a strange sort of paradise. Jinwoo recovered slowly, his ribs healing, his bruises fading from purple to yellow-green. Amara visited him every day, sometimes during her lunch break, sometimes after her shift ended at midnight. They talked about the future with the careful hope of people who'd learned that nothing was guaranteed. He told her about his plans, modest compared to his previous life, but full of passion. He wanted to start a consulting firm, helping small businesses navigate the complexities of international trade. He'd already reached out to old contacts, people who respected him for more than just his family name. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't make him rich, but it would be his. She told him about her dream of opening a community health clinic in underserved neighborhoods, the kind of place where people like her mother wouldn't have to choose between paying rent and seeing a doctor. It seemed impossibly far away, but he listened like it was already real, asking questions about logistics and funding models and community partnerships. When he was finally discharged, she picked him up personally, driving him to his new apartment across town. It was small, a one-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades, nothing like the luxury he'd been raised in. But when he opened the door and saw the space he'd rented sight unseen from Seoul, his face lit up like he'd found treasure. "It's perfect," he said, and meant it. Amara stood in the doorway of his empty apartment, watching him take it in. No furniture yet, no curtains, just bare walls and scuffed floors and windows that overlooked a fire escape. But the way he looked at it with such genuine joy made her fall in love with him all over again. "Help me christen it?" He held out his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her into the space. They stood in the middle of the empty living room, his arms around her waist, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. "We should probably get you a bed," she said practically. "The doctor said you need proper rest for those ribs. I should probably get a lot of things." He kissed the top of her head. "But right now, I just want this. You. Here, real." They spent that first evening sitting on the floor of his empty apartment, eating takeout with plastic forks, planning a future that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Shanello called 3 times before Amara finally answered, and her friend's voice was equal parts relieved and exasperated. "Girl, you better not be doing something stupid." "Definitely doing something stupid," Amara confirmed, watching Jinwoo try to fold himself into a more comfortable position on the hardwood floor. "But I think it might be the good kind of stupid." "There's a good kind?" "Yeah." She smiled at Jinwoo, who smiled back. The kind where you stop being afraid and start being brave. Over the following months, they built something neither of them had thought possible. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when Amara lay awake, worrying about what would happen if his father changed his mind, if those same people who'd driven a car into him decided to finish the job. There were moments when Jinwoo's carefully constructed calm would crack, and she'd find him staring out windows with an expression that spoke of losses she couldn't fully understand. But there were also mornings when she woke up in his bed. In the apartment, they were slowly filling with mismatched furniture and shared memories, and felt so completely happy it scared her. There were Sunday afternoons spent teaching him to cook her mother's jollof rice, laughing as he burned it 3 times before getting it right. There were evenings when he'd show up at the hospital at the end of her shift with terrible coffee and that soft smile that was only for her. 3 months after his discharge, Amara finally told her mother about him. It was a video call, her mother's face pixelated, but her disappointment coming through crystal clear. "A Korean man?" Her mother's voice was carefully neutral. "You know what happened when I married outside. You know the cost, Amara." "I know, Mama." Amara felt Jinwoo's hand find hers off-screen, anchoring her. "But I also know you've never once said you regretted it. You and Daddy, you chose each other and built something beautiful. That's what I'm trying to do." Her mother was quiet for a long moment, her face thoughtful, then softer. "He treats you well? This man? He treats me like I matter, like my dreams matter, like we're partners figuring it out together. Then bring him home." Her mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Let me meet this man who's made my daughter brave enough to fight for love." That Christmas, they flew to Houston. Jinwoo was terrified, his usual composure fracturing as they pulled up to her parents' modest house. The front yard was decorated with lights, and through the window, Amara could see her siblings gathered, waiting. "They're going to hate me," Jinwoo said, staring at the house like it might eat him. "They're going to love you." She squeezed his hand. "Because I love you, and because you're going to eat my mother's cooking and praise it like it's heaven, and you're going to play with my little brother's video games even though you're terrible at them, and you're going to be yourself. That's all they need." It wasn't perfect. Her father was reserved at first, watching Jinwoo with the protective suspicion of a man who'd seen his daughter cry too many times. Her youngest sister asked tactless questions about Korea and money, and whether he was secretly a K-pop star. The house was loud and chaotic, and nothing like the controlled silence Jinwoo had been raised in. But by the end of the night, he was on the floor teaching her brother a Korean card game, and her father was showing him photos from Nigeria, and her mother had pulled Amara aside to whisper, "He looks at you the way your father looks at me, like you're the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking." On the flight back, Jinwoo fell asleep with his head on her shoulder. And Amara thought about the wallet she'd found 2 years ago. How such a small choice had led to this, to a love that had survived separation and danger and the weight of 2 different worlds. She thought about the warning his driver had given her. "Speak of this to no one. For yours." She thought it was about keeping secrets, but maybe it had been about keeping faith, about protecting something precious until it was strong enough to survive in the light. The plane cut through clouds between earth and sky, between the life she'd known and the life she was building. Jinwoo shifted in his sleep, his hand finding hers instinctively, and Amara smiled. Between 2 worlds, she thought. That's where they'd always been. But maybe the point wasn't to choose one world or the other. Maybe the point was to create a third space, a place that belonged only to them, built from honesty and courage and the stubborn belief that love could be enough. The plane descended toward the city, toward their lives waiting below, and Amara kissed the top of Jinwoo's head gently. He stirred, opening his eyes, and the smile he gave her was sleepy and content and home. We're here, she whispered. We're home, he corrected, and she knew he wasn't talking about the city at all. The proposal, when it finally came 6 months later, was nothing like Amara expected. There was no fancy restaurant, no public declaration. Instead, Jinwoo woke her at 5 in the morning on a random Tuesday in February. Get dressed, he said, his eyes bright with barely contained excitement. I have something to show you. Jinwoo, it's 5 a.m. I have a shift at 7. I know, this won't take long. Please? Grumbling, she pulled on jeans and a sweater and followed him to his car. He drove them to the river, to the exact spot where they'd stood years ago when she'd first pulled away, afraid of what loving him might cost. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The city was quiet, the usual chaos not awake. Jinwoo led her to the railing, and she saw what he'd done. Tied to the railing were dozens of paper lanterns, each one handwritten with messages in English, Korean, Igbo, and Pidgin. She moved closer, reading them in the growing light. The day I met you, the first time you laughed at my jokes, when you taught me to dance, our first kiss, the night I had to leave, every day I missed you, the moment I came back, now, tomorrow, forever. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to find Jinwoo on one knee, holding a simple ring that caught the first rays of sunlight. Amara Bassi, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You taught me what it means to be truly seen, truly loved, truly alive. These last years with you have been the realest, truest, best years of my life. I know we've already survived the worst. I know we've already proven we can weather any storm. So I'm asking you now, in the place where we first admitted we were complicated, where we first acknowledged all the reasons this shouldn't work. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love is stronger than any obstacle the world puts between us? Yes, she managed through her tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy and promise. Around them, the city woke up, indifferent to the miracle happening on a random stretch of riverbank. But for Amara and Jinwoo, it was the moment their forever officially began. They married 3 months later in a ceremony that perfectly captured who they were. The venue was a small botanical garden, decorated with both Korean and Nigerian elements. Amara wore a traditional white wedding dress for the ceremony and changed into a stunning Nigerian aso-ebi for the reception. Jinwoo wore a tailored suit with Korean-style elements incorporated into the design. Mrs. Bassi cried through the entire ceremony. Marcus served as best man. Shinelo was maid of honor and gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. When Amara first told me about this man, Shinelo said, raising her glass, I thought she was setting herself up for heartbreak, a fairy tale that would end badly. But what I didn't understand then, what I've learned from watching them, is that the best love stories aren't fairy tales. They're battle stories. They're about two people who decide that loving each other is worth fighting for, even when the world says it shouldn't be, even when it costs everything, even when it would be easier to walk away. Amara and Jinwoo didn't get a fairy tale. They built something love that survived real obstacles, and that's more magical than any fairy tale could ever be. The reception was a beautiful chaos of cultures colliding in the best possible way. Korean aunties tried Nigerian food and declared it magnificent. Nigerian uncles attempted traditional Korean bows with varying degrees of success. The DJ seamlessly mixed Afro beats with K-pop, and somehow everyone danced together, separated by language and background, but united by joy. Late in the evening, Jinwoo pulled Amara away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the garden. Happy? Deliriously, she said, leaning into him. You? I didn't know I could be this happy. I didn't know happiness like this existed. He kissed her temple. Thank you for not giving up on us, for being brave enough to love me even when it was hard. Thank you for coming back, for fighting your way back to me. They stood there together, watching their families and friends celebrate, two worlds that had learned to become one. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when cultural differences caused confusion or hurt feelings, still times when they had to explain their relationship to people who didn't understand. But they faced it all together, two people who'd already survived the worst and knew they could survive anything else. Years later, when people asked how they made it work, how they navigated the complications of an interracial relationship built on such different foundations, Amara would smile and say, "We decided that love was a choice we made every day, not a feeling we waited to have. We chose each other over and over again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." And Jinwoo would add, "She returned my wallet when she could have kept it. I knew then she was someone who valued doing the right thing over doing the easy thing. That's who she is in everything, and that's why I'll choose her every day for the rest of my life." But on that wedding night, as they finally escaped to their hotel room, like exhausted and happy and covered in makeup kisses from well-wishers, they didn't think about the future challenges or the ongoing work of loving across difference. They only thought about how impossibly lucky they were to have found each other in a world designed to keep them apart. "Mrs. Park," Jinwoo said, pulling her close as they collapsed onto the bed, still in their reception clothes, too tired to change. "I'm keeping Bassie professionally," she reminded him. "But I like hearing you say it anyway." "Mrs. Park Bassie, then." "Better." She turned to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "I love you, Jinwoo. Thank you for being stubborn enough to come back to me. I love you, Amara. Thank you for being brave enough to love me in the first place." They fell asleep tangled together, two people from two worlds who'd created a third world entirely their own, built on honesty, sacrifice, and the kind of love that doesn't conquer obstacles but survives them, grows through them, becomes stronger because of them. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, full of other people fighting their own battles, loving across their own divides. But in that hotel room, in that moment, there was only peace. Only the quiet certainty of two people who'd fought for each other and won. Only the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that, built on a foundation strong enough to hold them both. Love didn't make their differences disappear. It didn't erase the complications or the challenges they'd face, but it did make those things bearable, even beautiful in their own way, because they'd proven something that the world had tried to tell them was impossible, that two people from different worlds could meet somewhere in between and build something entirely new, something that honored where they came from while creating space for where they were going.